Hi, everyone. Welcome to this live stream, a very, very important live stream to talk about the human response to Sery Kim's statements. And we are here with hashtag Asians for Humanity, and we'll be talking about that a bit later. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Aparajita Jeedigunta. My pronouns are she, her. And I would love for my lovely co-host Cheryl to introduce themselves, and we will be bringing the rest of our speakers on stage very shortly as well. Cheryl, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I'm the founder of Leading with Consciousness and very happy to be part of the Asians for Humanity team. That's it. Let's get the show on the road.
All right. So first up, I would like to introduce Donna, who is let me do this. Perfect. Donna, who is a neuroscientist, a historian for science, and so many other things. Donna, I would love for you to introduce yourself really quickly and give us give us your thoughts on what's going on right now as I bring up Susan, Hunja, and Chris as well.
Sure. So I think in this context, maybe the most relevant contributions I could make is as a community organizer in the greater Houston area. I've been active on the issue of immigration for the last many years. And yeah, maybe that's the most pertinent thing. I've worked with a lot of different organizations. I serve on leadership for Doctors for America, for an immigration advocacy group called Project Lifeline. I've been with our local chapter of the NAACP doing political advocacy work, and then also served on the board of the Korean American Association and Community Center of Houston with Hyunja Norman, and also co-founded a political action committee called Doctors in Politics. So very civically engaged and politically engaged. Yeah, so that's me. And then did you want me to introduce Hyunja, you said?
Yes, real quick before you do that. So I was able to get to my phone. And so a little bit more about Donna. Donna is a neurologist, neuroscientist, historian of science, and community organizer. She has navigated local, state, federal, and international partnerships across academia, government, and health sectors in rapid response and strategic mobilizations at the intersections of race, poverty, and immigration. Her belief that the rights to health, migration, and voting are foundational and have informed her leadership with Doctors for America, Project Lifeline, NAACP, Korean American Association, and the Community Center of Houston, and Doctors in Politics. Believing also that public education is a foundational right of a healthy democracy, Donna ran for the Pearland Independent School District Board of Trustees in 2019. I'm glad I was able to get to that, Donna. And with that, yes, let me bring up Hunja and Susan as well as Chris. Go ahead, Donna.
Excellent. So I would like to offer to introduce both Hyunja and Susan, who I invited to join us this morning. They are both in the greater Houston area with me. So Hyunja, first, she and I have served on that Korean American Association and Community Center of Houston board. She's been very active for like the last decade at least in making sure that we are taking care of our seniors in our community. And she has also made sure that seniors who are citizens are able to vote. And so she's organized early Korean American voting days for many years now, where she brings volunteer interpreters from our community to actually provide language services to largely our seniors. And so she's brought a lot of visibility to the importance of voting in the Korean American community in Houston, and did a lot of work around the census. And then she knows Susan they did a lot of work together during the early days of COVID, so about a year ago, where they organized just this tremendous effort to get Korean American women to sew thousands and thousands and thousands of masks for healthcare workers, for people, for educators, for students, a lot of people across our communities, not just the Korean American community, community, actually largely not the Korean American community, but also some people within our community. And Susan also is doing a lot of philanthropic work in the greater Houston area as well, and is very politically involved too. So this is, these are my two friends in the area, and I don't know if you all would like to add anything before we begin.
Donna, thank you. That's a wonderful introduction. Just
Well, we're Donna's fan club. Can you tell? We are in awe by the energy and the compassion and conviction that she has, and she inspires us each and every day. So thank you for including us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chris, would you like to introduce yourself really quickly, and then we'll get right into the discussion for today?
Absolutely. My name is Chris Lynn. I am a people and change consultant, as well as the host for the Leading People First podcast and a co-founder for the Leaders of Equity, Allyship, and Diversity. And very happy to be have worked and continue to work with Cheryl and Dr. AJ as we progress along with these important issues around the Asian community. So I'm glad that we could pull this together quickly to address. I was telling Cheryl earlier this morning, I wish we didn't have to do something like this on a weekly basis, but unfortunately we do, because there is a lot of hate and there's a lot of misconceptions, even within our own Asian community, that we need to address. So happy to continue doing this work and looking forward to today's discussion.
Awesome. So let's get right into this, discussion, especially given the upsurge and the uptick in violence against Asian Americans recently. But this is, of course, part of a longer historical pattern that has been embedded, that is largely an inevitable consequence of the structures that we operate in, the historical structures that we operate in. Here's where I want to start off with for all of us. Why are Sery Kim's problems especially problematic in the current climate and environment? Especially in terms of the impact, the really harmful impact that these types of statements could have on members of the AAPI community across the board. And for those of you who know Clubhouse lingo, we will go popcorn style. That means, like, if you have a thought that you would like to share, there is no particular order. Please just feel free to chime in. And I'm done speaking.
I'll offer something here. So I want to preface with a kind of a meta observation that sometimes when there is news like this, and this was very deliberately, it's very clear, very deliberately political, posturing on the part of the Sery Kim. It's sometimes not good to bring visibility to that and to allow it to basically escalate. So I was actually, when I first got the news that she made a statement like this, I actually was wanting to be quiet about it and to address it through local community conversations. Korean Americans who I know in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, one of whom is actually an elected official there. I wanted to kind of get them engaged in community-led conversations about this, as opposed to allowing it to escalate to national visibility. But unfortunately, because it's so provocative and the media just love that, it very quickly got national attention. And so then I felt very obligated to try to mobilize people in any way to make a very public and very strong statement denouncing her remarks. And she said so many wrong things. I couldn't even keep track of it. I was in a room yesterday on Clubhouse, which is for the people who are here who are not on Clubhouse. That's a social media app that allows you to talk to people. Like it's an audio app. And so we were having a conversation with, I think, a couple of hundred people in the room. And it was about this topic. And I just, yeah, I mean, I think it's really awful, especially in the context, as AJ put it, like this broader context of like within the last year, especially, we've seen a tremendous increase in violence directed towards Asian Americans. I think it's been about like almost 4,000 incidents have been reported, and that's not accounting for the many incidents that go unreported, because often people in our community do not speak out. And so I'm really deeply concerned that rhetoric like this will actually provoke people, not necessarily part of our community, but other people, to actually exact more violence against members of our communities. And, you know, you can't distinguish between a lot of East Asians. It's kind of hard to distinguish between us. So I think the implications are very broad for many of us, right? And I think it was just grotesquely irresponsible. It's the kind of thing that we see, unfortunately, from a lot of Republicans, especially in the state of Texas, is that they use these kinds of political opportunities without regard to the harm that follows, right? And it's really pretty disgusting and very dangerous in my judgment. So I'll stop there and I'll allow other folks to chime in. This is Donna. I'm done speaking. I'm so accustomed to Clubhouse. That's how we end. Okay.
Hyunja or Susan, when you saw this news first kind of break out, what were your initial thoughts, and how do you think we should combat this kind of harmful rhetoric as a community?
Well,
When I
read it, oh, go ahead, Hyunja.
Okay, Susan, you go ahead. Go ahead first.
When I read it, I was outraged. I stopped breathing and I said to Hyunja, who is this person? I mean, the emotions just ran very high. But what bothered me more was, how can she speak on behalf of Korean Americans, Asian Americans? Her thoughts are not what we share. She can certainly speak for herself, but she is running for an office. And so for her to speak on behalf of us it's not right. And on top of that, when someone with that type of potential visibility speak, and people like Donna said so well, East Asian, all of us of Asian descent, I'm sorry, we look the same physically to, the rest of the world. It's as if she's speaking on behalf of us, and she's not. So unless the rest of us start to say, hold on, this is not who we are, my concern is that the typical stereotype of, oh, I guess you all must believe in this, will perpetuate, and we need to stop that. But as Donna says, most of us in the Korean American community were raised to be demure and to be obedient and whatnot. So speaking out is not something we're raised to do. And so you are not going to hear from the majority. They will stay silent and be victimized. And so, yes, this is very bothersome to me. And I didn't know how to speak out, but at least now there's a forum here to start. So I'm grateful for that kind of opportunity. But yes, personally, I was outraged. Go ahead, Hyunja.
Yeah, when I received this message from Chinese community leaders, I was so surprised. I do not know what to do actually. Okay. So I do not say here I am Korean American. Okay, you do not say you are Asian, okay, what is it, Japanese American, Chinese American. They do not know where we come from, right? We look same. So who knows? I mean, that is, I'm sorry, but that is very ridiculous to saying this kind of word. So I want to know who is this lady actually. I went to her Twitter, and then she said that her parents come from South Korea, and then they cleaned and mopped the floor, and then that's how they raised her. Okay, how come an immigrant who had parents as an immigrant work this kind of hardship, and how can say that kind of things to other immigrants? I cannot understand it. Just, as a Korean, I cannot understand this. So this is not good for our community, not good for Asian American community. This got to stop. That's my thought.
Well, she's perpetuating the stereotype. I thought I read somewhere about, did she call this a China virus? A virus that comes, I mean, what is she talking about? That's the very language that, I'm sorry, former President Trump spoke, which to me, that's what started all this. And for her to perpetuate that, it's almost like, lady, who are you? I'd like to actually know who she is, what she's running for, and I would like to do something about it.
Yeah. Anja, please go ahead.
Okay. I do not know anything about Sery Kim until this news come out. Okay, but I just for me, someone who want to running for office, why you want to run for office? I think running office is a public service. You want to make your community be heard, and then you want to stand up for your community, but you do not want to stand up for our community. Why you are running for office? Or to have another title? That kind of things is ridiculous. I'm so personal. I'm very sorry. Yeah.
You know, Hanja, this is when I read this, it just, to your point and, you know, Susan's point, I couldn't breathe for a minute. Like, I just, you know, like it was hard for me to understand that, especially as many of us are working towards building solidarity within Asian communities and with other communities on what are actually human factors, human dignities, human rights, and to see these very things being politicized for personal gain, for personal clout, and for the sake of a campaign was appalling to me. It was, you know, one of the most disturbing behaviors I've seen, and the impact of that on groups now. As you know, Imaginos Pete in the comments said that this is the kind of rhetoric that justifies violence against not just AAPI communities, but also other, historically marginalized communities. And these are the types of justifications that are then, used, like, well, that lady said it, so it's okay now. And that's exactly what's not okay. And so it is, and we're getting more comments too. Absolutely, it is pandering to a racist base versus truly running to serve all constituents. Absolutely. I'd love for Cheryl to chime in here really quickly, because Cheryl actually got a statement from Dr. Bandy Lee, who, this is the nature of Dr. Bandy Lee's work, and we were able to get a statement from Dr. Lee, even though Dr. Lee could not join us, exactly to this point. And Cheryl's, kind of specialization is also mental health and psychological safety. So Cheryl, can you chime in and, kind of talk about, the impact that these kind of statements have on our kind of collective conscious and on our collective behavior, and how can we mitigate that, and how can we depoliticize and unracialize human issues?
Let me first read the statement from Dr. Bandy X. Lee, who really led a very strong campaign with a couple thousand mental health providers in the United States, saying very directly that the former president was unfit for office and inciting violence. And she predicted this violence that would come way ahead of anybody. She did advise Congress. She did advise many leaders. Her advice was not taken. She continues to analyze the situation. I want to name that Sery Kim did work under the Trump administration this entire time. And this messaging is exactly the same psychological tactics that were used during the 2016 campaign. And this is just part 2 of this story. What is scary to me, and I'll read Dr. Bandy's statement in just a second. What is scary to me is that these tactics are very good at mirroring and reflecting the hateful sentiments that are happening in households. In some of our, not all, but some of our households. The fact that there is such incredible amount of violence and discrimination happening to Asian Americans shows that the anti-Chinese sentiment is alive in some of these households. And this is the very thing we need to target. This hateful sentiment needs to go. This virus cannot be associated with any particular race. It cannot be associated with an ethnicity, because this is exactly what happens to the human mind. You have a trauma, right? And this is a global trauma. A pandemic is a trauma. The mind wants to blame something, right? And then you have a scapegoat. And what we are experiencing in the United States right now, as an Asian American community, as Asians living in the United States, we are experiencing the effects of this trauma as the target of we are these scapegoats right now. And that is the thing we need to sever. This relationship of the virus being associated with ethnicity, this needs to be severed, right? So I'm going to read Dr. Bandy X. Lee's statement. I quote, "When a recent immigrant says to another group, quote, 'I don't want them here at all,' unquote, it may mean, quote, 'I fear I am not wanted here at all.' When powerful leaders called a pandemic Chinese virus or Kung flu, violence escalated against anyone who looked Chinese. Asian Americans should not have to conform or collude with oppressors in order to feel they belong. John Yu's torture memos come to mind. Anyone predisposed to such psychology should be kept away from power at this sensitive time. If we are to prevent the predictable result of widespread, potentially epidemic violence that results when scapegoating comes from a public office." Now, this is a violence expert. She advises governments all over the world about how to prevent violence. She is right now, how I'm interpreting her statement is that she is saying that Sery Kim is going to incite violence. And we need to hear that. This is how harmful this impact is, right? We need to name that. So with that, I am done speaking.
This is AJ. Does anyone have any response to that? Chris, Donna, Hyunja, Susan?
What I'd like to point out is that Sery Kim's statements shows that racism is not bound to one particular group, and it can be traumatic within our own Asian communities, between our own ethnicities. And so when she makes a statement like, "I can say this because I'm Korean," is is essentially posturing the Asian community and continuing to posture us as a monolith, which is completely not true. And the statements from everyone here in this conversation so far have shown that we even though we may look alike, different ethnicities may look similar, it does not mean we are the same. And so those comments are incredibly dangerous and just continues to further incite this mindset of anti-Asian hate, because even though she may be differentiating in her mind the two ethnicities, many people cannot. And so it is incredibly dangerous to those who can't, who are not part of the Asian community, to take those words and say, oh, well, it's okay. So this is Chris, and I'm done speaking.
Absolutely. And I'd like to point out something that, for me, that came out of Dr. Lee's statement, but, Donna, and if you want to chime in, please let us know. One thing we know is that, and it goes back to my kind of what I started off with, is that violence has happened even before the Atlanta shootings, before any of these recent, upticks in violence, upticks in discrimination, in just this senseless and horrific levels of hatred. But what these types of statements do, and I really want to kind of underscore this point here, is they make it okay to be openly racist, internally and externally. And when people start leaning into this idea of it is okay to be openly racist, it is okay to not just have certain thoughts about other people, but to use them to not just discriminate, but incite violence and harm against somebody else, physically, mentally, psychologically. That is when we are stepping away from the core of what we should be fighting towards progress as human beings, because of our differences, aligning those differences, embracing and cherishing those differences internally, and being able to respect each other because of them. These kinds of open statements and this kind of open level of racism literally negates almost all of the progress that we've been making, and it disempowers and disenfranchises those who are also doing work on the ground in terms of, Chris, what you said when we started, I wish we didn't have to do these on a weekly basis. But truly speaking, if we don't mitigate this, if we don't nip this kind of rhetoric in the bud right now, we're going to have to be doing these kind of, conversations and mitigations and condemnations and responses on a daily basis. And that's where we don't want to get to. And that's, why it is, I think, for us as a community, extremely important to come together and openly and publicly condemn this kind of rhetoric, so that at least those who want to ally with us, those who want to work with us, know exactly the truth in which we stand and operate from. At least that's my thoughts. Donna, I think you unmuted, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. And then Susan and Hinja as well, please. I'm done speaking.
I wanted to add additionally, I'm really glad that that Bandy Lee had a comment to make on this. Wow, my voice, I don't know what happened. I can't believe that she was actually an HHS appointee. Like, when I think about people who are in health and human services, I certainly don't think about people like this who would make statements like this. And within the profession of medicine, I think this is probably also true for allied health professions as well. We have like a large overrepresentation of Asian Americans in this country practicing. I do feel like we have a responsibility to really speak out very vocally against this. Like I said, it is very dangerous, and this kind of this kind of rhetoric is like, it's a kind of like disinformation that we really should be examining as like a public health issue, that people can perpetuate this kind of language and can incite violence as a function of that. We really should be looking at it as a public health issue. And I'm glad that people who are in medicine and otherwise are weighing in. That was the comment I wanted to make.
Was it Cheryl who read that statement? Was that you? Yeah, I'm on a phone, so you guys are tiny. Inciting violence is real. My husband and I lived in this country, me 50 years and for him 60 years. And both of us independently and collectively have experienced different sort of racism, but they have been very subtle, sort of not enough for you to turn your head. But recently, within the past year, I personally and my husband have witnessed very blatant, overt, in your face at grocery stores when my cart bumps into someone else's accidentally. That person would just turn and says some nasty word and says, "Go back to your country. What are you doing here?" I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you see in media, and when it hits you, you're like, "Oh my gosh," it's, and that kind of overt hate is now being vocalized at grocery stores. But what I wanted to ask you all is, I like to hear from everyone. So what can we do? What should we do individually, collectively, as a group? I like to hear some ideas, because I, as a citizen, I don't really know what to do. I don't want to just, I don't know what to do. And I like to hear from you all.
This is Chris. I would say, it's going to differ from person to person first, because we all have our different strengths and our different focuses. So, for example, for myself, it's continuing to have conversations like this, but at the same time, very vocally and very publicly denouncing every single one of these attacks, whether they be verbal or physical. Because we have to call it what it is, and we have to call hate, hate. We have to call racism, racism, and we cannot shy away from being rebuked or from because we're calling something horrible what it is. So we absolutely need to, when these instances happen, we need to call it out exactly how we're doing it right now, and continue doing so people understand who are spewing this rhetoric. They need to understand that this is not okay and this will not be tolerated, and if they continue to do so, they will be, we have to cast them out from society. This mindset cannot continue perpetuating within our society. This is Chris Linden speaking.
But how do we get that message out? I mean, all of us here and those who are joining, it's like preaching to the choir. How do you get this message out collectively to those who are not on this forum? Who don't give, what do we do about that?
Okay. The last 2 or 3 weeks, I was busy to attending Stop Asian Hate demonstration. I think just, as you see, I am not comfortable talking about these issues because I don't speak English, good English, okay? So I do not make a mistake. Just what I said to harm my community, and then that kind. I'm worried about that kind. worried about those things. But still, I think I have to go and show up. Because if I don't, who is going to show in my Korean community? Nobody will show up, then they will think we don't care about these kind of issues. But we care about, we are busy, not care enough. So, but I have to do these kind of things. Show up. Yesterday we went to Congressman Al Green's news conference about Stop Asian Hate. So I have to go those meetings to show we are also same. We are facing this kind of discrimination. And then last year I talked to one of the senior from New York or Pennsylvania or somewhere. They said they face racism. They never faced this kind of racism before, but his life in America, 40 or 50 years, but this is real. He said he is really facing a lot of racism. Sometimes really feel not safe. I heard this kind of stories from our seniors. So I think we have to do something. Whenever we have a opportunity, we need to speak out, even simple language like me.
I'd like to add something. You trigger something in me. In Georgia, I understand that the ministers of the Korean Presbyterian churches, these are Korean ministers, first generation, are now taking a stance and publicly preaching to their flock. It says it is time for us to stop being indifferent and take responsibility, and we need to speak out. And when I read that, my heart just warmed, because I don't know about other Asian American groups, but Koreans, when a minister or your pastor says do this, you do that. It's just a very high respect. But those church leaders to start speaking out where previously they haven't, I think that's a very positive step. And I like to find a way to encourage the local Korean pastors to unite, as the pastors in Georgia, Atlanta are finally coming together and taking a stance.
Yeah. So this is AJ. So, I think this is a great question, because we always have to kind of think about the solutions, right? How do we keep moving forward? Couple of things that are coming to my mind is, not just church leaders, right, Susan, and not just in Korean American communities, but across AAPI communities, across all AAPI communities, all of the community leaders need to speak to their communities about the human problem that this is, without racializing it and without politicizing it, and condemning the anti-humanity that is really the underpinning of this statement, the fact that the hatred that is the underpinning of this statement. In addition, I think, a couple of the things that I know at Asians for Humanity, our team, Jimmy's not here right now. Jimmy's also a member of our team, but Jimmy, Cheryl, Chris, and I, some of the things that we're working on are things like when these types of incidents happen, the language that we need, the exact language that we need as just the general public to be able to condemn this kind of rhetoric safely, while keeping in mind our physical and our psychological safety, because at the end of the day, we don't want to also create a situation where anybody else gets victimized for speaking up against it, which is where a lot of that fear comes from and a lot of our silence comes from, in addition to the the cultural norms of being timid and demure, there's also that real sense of fear. So to combat that fear, to give people the language that we need, and to give them things like, talk to your representatives and use this language to tell them how they need to then communicate to their constituents and about where they stand. Use these exact points, use these exact keywords, these exact reasons. Having those kind of templates that can then be, used to kind of standardize this messaging and standardize this communication across all platforms to our communities is one way that we can get this message across. In addition to the policy end, we also need to push on the corporate end and ask corporate leaders to do the same within their employee base, but also in terms of their recruitment, in terms of their engagement, employee engagement, making sure that their employees have safe spaces to talk about this without negative consequences, without negative repercussions, while keeping in mind that psychological safety component. In addition to that, also leaning to educators, and teachers and professors on how these type of examples need to be examples of don't do this in our learning, in our development, and then to contrast that with this is how you work towards progress, a contrasting example. So across sectors is, it needs a multi-pronged approach with clear and consistent communications across the board so that no matter where our community members may be getting the information from, they're all getting that same information and they know there's a whole community to support them in this so that they know they have spaces for support, for safety, for bystander training, for, and Cheryl, you can speak to those in greater depth than I can, but those are sort of the immediate strategic things that we need to, I think, do, and then boil them down to kind of the tactics. But I think at the end of the day, we can't lose sight of the overarching vision here that hatred is a human problem that divides all of us. And we are not fighting against each other. We are coming together to fight against hatred. We are coming together to fight against racism because of our identities, not despite of them. And that's sort of, those are my thoughts. And I'm done speaking.
Yeah, Dr. AJ, I'll just chime in here just a tiny bit more, just to add to everything that you've said that has been like so on point, right? So incredible here. I think that the main thing that I have been saying to leaders and when I enter organizations to talk about what's going on is that don't ignore the obvious. Don't ignore the obvious. And I'm not saying uplift the obvious like what Sery Kim is doing. I'm saying that if you sense hatred that happens behind closed doors, if you sense that the culture of your organization, the culture of your household, right, is racializing this virus and dangerously creating hatred, you've got to nip it in the bud. So you've got to name the obvious, but instead of giving it a platform, give it a road to positivity. Give it a road to transform. Instead of focusing on, hey, that's wrong, that's hateful, do that, and then give it direction. This is what you can do with your fears. This is what you can do with your hatred, right? Put it in a direction that is positive, right? I think what is scary to me, right, and is that this isn't a new thing. Post 9/11, we saw this happen, right? we saw that formula. Traumatic thing happened, and then hatred developed, and then we had Islamophobia. And so many people in our API community are Muslim, and it didn't even matter if you weren't Muslim. If you looked a certain way, you were the target of hatred. World War II, didn't matter if you were Japanese or Chinese, right? Same thing. During the Vietnam War, right? There were issues. So, I mean, like, we've got to shift from giving hatred a platform, which is what Sery Kim is doing, to saying, but giving it a road to transform. And I think that is sort of my leadership message, whether you are an organizational leader, a community leader, whether you are a parent in a household, this is what I hope that you do, is that you take this hatred and you transform it. You don't ignore it because it'll grow, but you nip it in the butt and you give it direction. So anyway, that was my little piece there.
I love what you just said. Could you give me some examples of how do you redirect someone? Just an incident, you run into someone at the grocery store and they say things that you just know it's a racial slur. Public, what do you say? What do you do? Could you give me some examples?
Well, I can only speak for myself, that because this has happened in my Asian community, right? I hear hatred, right? I'll say, look, do you think this hatred can tell the difference between your face and mine? Do you think the hatred can tell the difference between my face or a Chinese person's face? It can't. And this is violent. So if you want to do something, right, talk about what's needed in our community right now. Right now, we need masks. I remember when people were just scrambling for masks, right? Shift people towards positivity around solving a problem that they feel scared around or they feel awful about. Give them solutions, give them a road to shine, but don't give them the platform to hate. Does that make more sense?
Yes and no. That person is clearly wanting to vent their anger. Their emotion is already here for whatever ticked them off, and they're yelling at you in words that should not be said. What do you do? Do you walk away? Do you try to talk to them calmly? Because when you do, it just kind of, they get angry and angry and angry, and now you have a crowd around you like listening to what's happening. I mean, I'm asking you seriously, what do you do?
Are you talking about how this might be another Asian person? Or
no.
Oh, okay. I was referring to our fellow Asian people.
No, this is someone who's not of Asian descent, who your grocery cart bumped into theirs, and they start cursing at you and telling you to go back to your country and saying all these things. What do you do at that moment? I can't have a logical, calm conversation with them.
No. I think we need to, first of all, assess for safety. Do you feel safe in that moment, right? Are you physically safe? And then, are you psychologically safe, right? Are you okay inside, right? If you feel like you have people around you and you feel safe enough, yeah, say something, right? Say something in response. Be strong.
What do you say?
But, well, you're racist.
Oh yeah, if I say that, that would be world.
But you have to. We have to make a stand. It is, call it what it is. You are being really hateful and racist, and I do not deserve this.
Okay, this is my home too.
I mean, I'll be honest. I was harassed on the street, right? I was harassed with my 2.5-year-old. I was in the playground, right? A man comes up, starts to call names. It was scary, right? But I was all by myself with my 2.5-year-old. I would have yelled at this person had I not been alone, but there was suddenly a bystander who came beside me, right? And so I said what I had to say. And this person got scared because I had a bystander helping me. But then, you know what I said? I also said, you know what? I know you're angry and scared and you're horrified by this pandemic. So am I. And you know what? I actually forgive you. I get it. But your hatred and your racism it's unacceptable. And that's what I did. But I would not have done it had I not felt safe with this bystander. So anyway, that's just my little 500 cents.
Yeah.
And
I definitely want to underscore for everyone watching this now or later that physical and psychological safety component is extremely important. So, Susan, to your point, if there is somebody who is hurling all of these slurs at you, and if the safest thing that you can do is walk away in complete silence, then that is absolutely the right action for that moment. Because especially knowing that this hatred is coming from a space of so much emotion, it does not make sense. Handling the emotions of another person is not your priority over your safety. So at the end of the day, it has to come down to understanding your safety, understanding your boundaries physically and psychologically. And when I was talking about bystander training and psychological safety training, these are the types of things in these larger trainings and in these larger conversations that we can talk about. We definitely can't unpack it all today, but the takeaway here is, if you are in a crowd of people that you have support, then please do speak up and say, your language towards me, your hatred towards me is unwarranted and is unnecessary, and it is not okay. If you see somebody else who is being victimized by somebody, and you happen to have, you are able to, at the very least, walk up to them and move them away from the person who is, verbally attacking them, then do that. So as a community, these are the things that we can do by coming together and really just watching out for each other, so that we can make sure that this is that we keep each other safe. Everything else beyond that, in terms of the longer term solutions for reducing this hatred and all of that, come after we are first able to establish that foundation of safety.
I appreciate that feedback, because safety is important. Often.
Oh no, I think we lost Susan, but we will wait for her to come back.
I really quick wanted to, while we're waiting, I also want to quickly add, I don't think stepping away, if you are in physical danger in this scenario, you absolutely need to step away. The thing that I would like to add, though, is that us in the Asian community, we have an added layer of the model minority myth, and I know that we want to talk about that in a little bit, is that if we were to just walk away silently, it almost perpetuates that myth a little bit more, that they can just take it, they won't stand up for themselves. So this is why we need allies. This is why we need bystanders. This is why we need people around us to be aware of what's going on, to step in for our community, for those who are dealing with this. What happened to that 65-year-old grandmother in New York, where she was attacked, and these individuals, a security guard whose job is to protect other people, closed the door? Completely unacceptable. This is why we have to bring awareness and raise awareness and get more people to be allies, to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. I, being a 34-year-old Chinese American, even though I could physically defend myself, it is more beneficial for someone who is not Asian American to step in for me, to say, hey, that is not okay. Because in having bystanders step in is a greater deterrence to violence than for me to try to address it myself, because that will only escalate it. So for us, we need those who do not identify as Asian to come up with us and stand with us and be aware of what is happening. And again, I know that we have to also address this whole issue with the model minority myth. So Donna, I wanted to pass that back off to you to see, to go on to talk about that. This is Chris, and I'm done speaking.
So I mean, broadly, the model minority myth is like super problematic, right? Because it gives us this idea that it actually creates hierarchy, right? And often it's referred to as a wedge, as a racial wedge. And historically, that's been used specifically, very specifically, actually, between Asian Americans and the Black community here in the United States. But certainly it can be used within our communities as well, right? Because there is also some perception that there is hierarchy within the AAPI community also. And there are certainly groups within the AAPI community that more often get erased in public narratives about who is Asian American. So it's really important to think about this myth because it's being used against us, really. But then what happens is that it's sold to us as this thing that's very innocuous, and it's something that maybe you shouldn't even aspire to be, right? And so you end up kind of embodying this and perpetuating it, and it's actually super harmful. I don't know what else to say about it. I'll leave it there. I could probably say so much more, but I'm going to leave it there because I know that we wanted to kind of shut down around now, right?
Donna, but if I could just draw it back to Sery Kim and what I think she's doing exactly what you were, what you just talked about, which is create a ranking system even within the API community. And that is the part that is unacceptable to me and incredibly divisive. Even amongst us API folks saying that I am more assimilated than you are, and therefore I get to do this is not okay. We need to stop this. This is the thing that I hope that people walk away with, if anything, today.
Absolutely. I think a couple of things that I want to kind of bring up is absolutely, again, after that safety foundation is set, if you are able to speak up, if you are able to, especially, let's not even talk about situations where you might be getting attacked. Let's talk about situations that are safe to begin with among your friends and families and networks. Start having these conversations, especially whether they are, fellow Asian Americans or whether they are from other communities, any other communities. The way we start doing this is by speaking up, speaking our truth, and listening to the other person's truth as well. In this, I'm specifically also talking about about Black communities across the country, especially. In not, when we are looking for allies, we also need to be intentional allies. It is a two-way street. So starting that two-way street, starting those conversations that are mutually beneficial in helping us understand each other's perspectives better, so that when we encounter situations where either we or somebody else may potentially be unsafe, we are equipped with the language from these conversations in terms of what we can do. And at that point, we have a support system built up, whether physically or virtually, that we can then rely on of, hey, this is something that happened. Can you help me get this message out? Right? It is not just about our leaders. It is not just about the community leaders. Every single one of us in this is a leader in our own right, because we have our social networks. We have our family networks. We have our faith-based networks. We have all sorts of networks that we can, right after this conversation is done, take this message into those spaces and say, hey, this is something that I was a part of today. What do you think about it? How are ways in which we can support each other based on this? How can I better support you or anybody, that you may know of if they are unsafe? If I happen to be there, what are some things that I can do that would be helpful to you? Asking those types of questions and really listening to the answers. And when somebody else asks you those kinds of questions, responding instead of being silent and saying, oh, well, anything that you can do. Yes, anything they can do, but also if you have specific needs, that's the time to voice them. To say, when somebody says, Chinese virus, please stop them. That's harmful. When somebody says, go back to your country, please let them know this is my country too. I have nowhere else to go back to. This is it. This is all I got. Those sorts of things. As we have more conversations about this, I think, again, part of it is to kind of negate that fear mentality and build the confidence to even be able to have these kind of conversations, knowing that that especially within your social networks, it's not a space of judgment, it's a space of discussion. So building that confidence by practicing it in spaces that are safe for you is then going to allow you to be empowered in spaces outside of your safety bubbles, if that makes sense. And with that, I am done. And I know our team member Jimmy is on. Jimmy is on here, and so is Chris. And I would love to bring both up, and I would especially love to hear from Jimmy about what our team, Asians for Humanity, is up to, and what you can expect from us towards this very human movement against hatred. So 1 second as I add them. Jimmy, you're muted.
Hey everyone, how's everyone doing? I think this is really important with everything that's been going on. Like the verbiage that we've had today, that we're talking about today, is actually a very big deal, and it's on a bigger picture issue that's going on. And this has been happening through not just this last year. This has been done for decades, if not centuries, within this larger community. And for us here at Asians for Humanity, we want to be able to, what we're going to do is we're going to actually strategize on how us as a community of multi-Asian communities working together to not just do this for an individual group of us, but not even just to do just for Asians, but for all of humanity. And this is, first, it starts off with, helping and being allies with our Black communities, our Latinx communities, other communities that have also experienced violence and racism, but also for us as multiple Asian communities supporting each other and standing up together for humanity. And so what you'll expect to see from us is we will be working on a plan and a step of how we as a community can actually accomplish that. And so hopefully soon we'll have a website being put up, information statements, educational materials, etc. But we as a community need to stand up not just for ourselves as an individual or ethnic culture. We need to stand together for our Asian community, for the Black community, for all of humanity. And that is something that's really important, that we need to get to the next level. Otherwise, the blame, the violence, it's going to just shift from one group to another to another. And the only people that hurts all of us. It's not just hurting one community, it's hurting all humanity.
Donna and Hyunja, do you have, as we start wrapping this up, do you have any kind of final thoughts before we throw the mic back to Chris after. Hinja or Donna, either one.
Yeah, I like to say this. An immigrant, we are all immigrants. An immigrant become an American, they become an racist. They do not want to others come this country. So I think this is very everything. I think we have to work together for all ethnic group, not Asians. I agree with Jimmy. We need to work with the more I learn about America, I see more problem people who face in this country. So many different issues. Adoptees, Asian American prisoners, they do not have citizenship. So they face everyday difficulties. I think we really need to work together. We tend to just only stay in Korean community, right? But I think we have to extend our arms to other community and work together to make this country for better all of us. I like to say last one, we stand together we stand together, okay? United.
I completely echo everything that Hyunja stated there. I also think when we study the history of our various communities within the United States, that it's not just the problems, which I think it's important to understand. And I think they're also not just historic, right? A lot of things are also in the present moment. They continue. But it's also, I think, the possibility in understanding those problems, right? The possibility that emerges from that understanding. And I think conversations like this are actually really, really important. Public conversations, but also private conversations, as people have brought up here, where you do have leverage in private conversation with individuals and communities. I think that is also really, really important, because for some people, that's where they find psychological safety, is in a more private setting. And that's the opportunity for transformation that exists, as Cheryl alluded to earlier. So I mean, I think we should be doing all of it, and we are. So I think we just need to keep on keeping on. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Cheryl and Chris, any closing thoughts? And thank you so much, Donna and Hinja, for being such an important and amazing part of this, critical conversation. Cheryl and Chris.
Yeah, maybe just addressing Sery Kim directly. Sery Kim, I am an immigrant of both Chinese and Malayan descent from Singapore. I am on the road to citizenship, and your words broke my heart. I hope you will stop.
I don't know how else to better put it than what everyone else has already said, because they've said it so eloquently. So I'll be brief. If whoever's watching this, if you are within the Asian community, I ask that you start standing up for one another. We have a lot of intergenerational trauma that we need to heal through. We have a lot of trauma that our nations have gone through historically. And we need to find a way to heal past that, because we need to come together in instances like this, because attack against one is an attack against all of us at this point, because we are seen as one. As far as for those of you who do not identify as Asian or Pacific Islander, please, we are begging you, stand with us. If you see something happening in front of you, whether it be a physical or verbal altercation, or if you see any racist act or verbalization, please stand up for those around you who may not be able to speak up for themselves. And with that, this is Chris. I'm done speaking.
Thank you all for this, incredibly important conversation. I'd like to take us all the way back to the inception and conception of America. A plane that was flown as it, was being built very imperfectly to only benefit a few. Those are the structures that we operate in. And as people, as communities, as this plane is still being flown, we get to fix those parts to make sure that this plane flies well and long in the way that we want it to for all of us. And Chris, I could not have said it better. And, Imagino's Pete in the comments too. Thank you for all your comments. An attack against one of us is an attack against all of us. We were silent. Many of us in the AAPI community were silent during the Black Lives Matter movement because we did not know our voice. We did not know where we could stand, where we could be in solidarity. What is happening within our communities now is not a comparison at all. It is a learning moment for us to do our part in first standing up for ourselves and standing up for each other and building that intentional solidarity now that we are realizing that this is not a them problem. This is an all of us problem. It's never been a them problem. And directly to Sery Kim, keep posturing because we will keep fighting for humanity against all posturing, against all divisions, against all racism. And this is not just for Sery Kim, right? Because Sery Kim is just a symptom and an example of a much larger problem. So anybody like Sery Kim too, for all of that rhetoric of hatred, the best thing that we can do is to stand strong in our truth, solidarity, and counter the hatred for humanity across all groups, as Jimmy said. So, and to Donna's point, these conversations, public, private, semi-public, semi-private, all of the above. Let us know where we can meet you. And we will meet you at that point to set the foundations that we need. But if you don't let us know where to meet you, then we don't know where to begin. So that let's have these conversations in any capacity and let's move together. And as Jimmy said, we are going to be launching the site soon with a ton of resources and also initiatives that you can get involved in and just so many more things. We are very intentional and deliberate and fast with this coalition. And so we will, I know Jimmy is telepathic because he just put that up there. And so we will be coming back to you soon with our next set of programming and future conversations. And for now, we are 17 minutes over time. So I thank you all. And we will end this live stream today and see you in a future conversation. Bye, everyone.